Hello again. Sally Rodgers.
Should I be switched on or am I not switched? Am I on? 1, 2.
Yeah.
You can tell I'm a professional. 1, 2.
So look, of course I know a man called Adam and I'm aware of that side, but what I wasn't aware of was the thing that you sent me. So Sally was asking me earlier on, what we're going to talk about, and I said, well, I never really know. I do very, very little research. I kind of letting you into my secret. I always wing this. I never sit down knowing what, because I'm just making this up as we're going along. But the thing that I really, really wanted to ask about, you sent me was it an introduction to a book?
It is, yes. I've been peddling my book around agents recently, and I keep having to rewrite it endlessly to find the right way of selling the book. And that was the latest incarnation of the introduction.
Well, I love it because you're writing it. So after submitting the first draft of my thesis, which is titled From Memnon to
Gangnam.
Gangnam, is
yeah,
it?
From Memnon to Gangnam.
A diachronic study of technology-led abstraction in oral, written and music-based poetry. Yeah. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah,
that's
okay,
what I want to know about.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's what PhDs are like. You have to have one of those ridiculous titles. They wouldn't give you one if you didn't have one of those titles. Gosh, so you're asking me what it's about?
Yeah.
I think it's sort of, I tried to explain in that introduction that you realise when you're doing a PhD that it's totally idiosyncratic. You know, that they're completely about you and your life. So really, I went to do a master's in poetry, like writing the stuff. You know, I'm not very good, so that will never see the light of day. But really, I just wanted to know what the difference was between a poem and a lyric, a song, because I'd written lots of songs, and they're always a bit of a sort of second-class citizen, you know, to the poem. The poem is the rarefied, beautiful thing, you know, and the song is the poor relation. So I wanted to know why a poem is a poem, you know, what makes a poem. So it's very technical, and it was a very technical inquiry that I had, you know. I wanted to know about what makes a poem work. So I did the master's and wrote some, I wouldn't say piss poor, but you know, not brilliant poetry. There were other people who were very good on the masters. And then the PhD, I suppose, is a sort of extension of that. And it was that we'd written songs, and then technology came along, recording technology. Like in the late 80s, we were a big live jazz band. You know, there were 10 of us. Wow. And we were doing Latin jazz. That was our thing, you know, that was me, little. So the guy at CBS said I was the new Millicent Martin, which is sort of damned with faint praise, isn't it? But that's what we were doing. And then suddenly we sort of went to the recording studio, and our friend Matt had some samplers, Akai samplers, you know, S90s, you know, take about 4 days to load and save a sample.
2 seconds.
Half a second drum track or whatever. But that kind of transformed, you know, so we made these big records for acid jazz that were the live band on one side, and then we sort of cut up the music on the other side. And you know, we had one track that was called Musica de Amor, which was me singing in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. But I did one verse in English, and there's a line that says, "Up and down the street, no happy faces do we meet." It's a terrible translation. But we sampled this line, and it just said, "No happy faces." and it just went, no happy faces, no, you know. And then sampled bits with Steve's piano, and we programmed it through a 909 drum machine. And just basically what happened was technology transformed the practice. It changed the music that we make. And I guess, getting back to the PhD, what's that about is that technology transforms the way we express ourselves, whether you're a filmmaker or a novelist or a photographer or a graphic designer or whatever you happen to be. It particularly transforms your life if you're a musician or you're working in music. And I'm a lover of poetry. So it's a 200-year study.
Wow.
I know, crazy.
When you start an inquiry, I mean, what was your starting point for that inquiry? Because that's a really global...
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of nuts. Most people do a PhD that's like 5 years in the life of, you know, some obscure novelist and limit everything. But I started with the Romantic poets at the beginning of the modern age, and about that time there was lots of kind of acoustic science. You went from the... Sorry, is this boring?
No, no.
You go from the Enlightenment, which is the 18th century, which is all sort of optical, you know, Newtonian physics, and it's all laws of science, immutable laws. And then you just get the French Revolution and sort of paleontology, all sorts of things, and it just throws the whole world into sort of everything that you thought was real is questioned. And there's also this amazing kind of acoustic science at the beginning of that century, and that's the foundation of recording technologies.
I had no idea about it.
Yeah, look them up. There's this guy called Chladni, and he did sort of sand on a metal plate, and you vibrate the plate, and it makes these amazing patterns. And so you start to see that the sort of patterns of sound are in nature, and the Romantic poets kind of absorbed all this stuff.
Wow.
So they were sound obsessed. They were nutters, absolute.
A bit like we are now.
Yeah, and they were kind of crazy for sound, and it changed the way poetry was written then, and then continued. You know, and then you have telegraphy, and gramophones, and cinema, and radio, and everything else that comes. And each time you have these sort of incredibly sort of seismic shifts in the way poetry is written, to the point where now we have sort of rap and oral sort of forms that are back because there's so much kind of communication technology that, you know, YouTube and televisual things. And
how, as going about this study and this exploration, what's happened to you and for you?
I suppose you'd have to sort of rewind a little bit to where I was at in my life.
Rewind then.
Yeah, okay. We had a very fun and successful sort of 90s. We were doing well, and we had our own label, and we did our lots of gigs and lots of shows, and everything was going well. And then in the early noughties we had a record deal, but you sort of get to a level and you've got to go up. You can't sort of carry on like that. And we had a record deal with a big label, or not a big label, but a label called Pagan that was well funded. There's a guy called Miles Copeland, I don't know. Yeah. And we had a great band. Like, we had some of the guys from the Divine Comedy, and we had the drummer from the Spice Girls. Yeah, it was great, and we had the best band, and we were having the best time. We made an album. I don't think it was a work of genius, but it was a decent, you know, solid record. And we started to do some shows, and it was sort of, we were almost on the edge of that thing where you know you're going to go up to not headlining big stages, but you know, you're going to have a decent slot on the jazz stage or something. You know, you're in that zone. And it just felt great. It was kind of like a sort of country rock, sort of, you know, Fleetwood Mac, Fairport Convention, you know, that it had a great sound, and we were very happy with the guys. It was great fun. And then the label went bust, and the album got shelved, and because you can't do that without that support.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we thought we had time to think we were heartbroken, but it was sort of like that opportunity just sort of slipped away. And our management tried to get us another deal, and the only deal we could get was with Norman Cook's label, Southern Fried. And Norman's a great guy and everything, but what they wanted was for us to sound like our old records. They wanted us to be sort of chill out, electronic remixes, kind of, you know, and I'm not dissing anybody here, they wanted their hands on our old catalogue.
Okay.
So effectively it was a kind of backwards sort of motion, you know, and we did it because, you know, they paid us to do it. But it wasn't where we, you know, it wasn't that thing that was going to sort of take you into that new place. And so when that kind of petered out, as it did a little bit in the kind of mid-noughties, and then stuff happened in my personal life, and loss and things, bereavement, I just took a step back and went back to school, basically, and so did Steve. Steve is also doing a PhD. But we didn't stop making music. You just stepped away. It was like, I don't know. It wasn't like we were angry or bitter or desperately disappointed or anything like that. I don't think we even processed that at the time. It was just a step away.